I think the indications that the vast majority of Canadians are looking to get vaccinated will get us to a good place without having to take more extreme measures that could have real divisive impacts on community and country.
You know what? If you don't want to get vaccinated, that's your choice. But don't think you can get on a plane or a train beside vaccinated people.
No, we aren't doing it. Simple as that. We're just going to move forward. Now, if it's federal, getting across the border, that's up to the federal government. We'll see what they decide to do. I'll be talking to the Prime Minister tonight. But the answer is no, we aren't going to do it. We aren't going to have a split society. We can't afford to shut down again or experience a sudden surge in cases, like we're seeing in other provinces across the country. And I truly believe that this tool, these certificates, they're the best chance we have to get through this coming months without having to move backwards.
I don't even know what a vaccine passport is. All I know is this, that it's illegal based on the Privacy Act to ask somebody whether they've received a certain medical procedure or not, including a vaccine. So the government of Alberta at least will not be participating in anything like that.
To adopt the restriction exemption program, a proof of vaccination program for participation in certain discretionary activities that have a higher risk of viral transmission.
I always tell this story. There's a famous play called A Man for All Seasons, and it's about Sir Thomas More. And in that, he describes why it is that he, as a lawyer, thinks that the law should protect everyone, even villains, even people you don't like. And the purpose, he says, is because when you cut down all the laws in England, he would say, cut down all the laws in England to go after the devil, in this case, the devil is COVID. If we cut all those laws down, what happens when the devil turns around on us? What law is going to protect us when those winds blow?
Canadians believed that they had fundamental rights. There was a clear legal precedent defending our charter and constitutionally enshrined freedoms. This included bodily autonomy, especially against undue medical procedures like vaccine injections. Seemingly overnight, those long-held values have evaporated. They are simply disappearing before our eyes. We have entered a world of lawlessness in which the Charter is no longer the measure by which laws are checked. What has happened to the Canada that we grew up in?
Warning, censorship.
Adam Sos here for Rebel News, and I am about to be joined by Derek Fromm. Derek is a lawyer who has been helping with our vaccineconsultation.com campaign. People afraid of losing their fundamental rights often don't have the means to speak with a lawyer. Through vaccineconsultations.com, people have had that chance and have been able to find some comfort in planning how they'll move forward. So no doubt a few of our people had a chance to speak with you, but for those who don't know you, if you could maybe introduce yourself and talk about your involvement with vaccineconsultations.com.
So my name is Derek Fromm. I'm a lawyer. I practice near Calgary. I spent 10 years doing constitutional law for the Canadian Constitution Foundation in Calgary. And since then, I've moved into private practice. And the vaccine consultations, it's been very interesting. I've had many people contact me and have been working through some of the problems with them. And it's very frustrating because there's no easy solutions. We've never been through anything like this before in our history, and all we have is the law as it's developed. For some people, the Constitution will protect them. For some people, it's labor law, and that's a black box to me. For other people, it's employment law, and basically what we can do is help them negotiate some sort of a reasonable stalemate or conclusion to their employment. It's extremely frustrating, but preparing people for what's coming up has been very important because it seems to me that people have had a hard time getting lawyers that will even speak to them about these issues. And people are going off into the dark, not realizing what they're getting into. They have families to feed, mortgages to pay, and here they're about to lose their job. So it's very frustrating. both for them and for myself, because I wish I could offer them better solutions, but all I can do is help guide them through the process.
Well, and I think for lots of people, the costs involved and the fear with even talking to a lawyer or trying to figure out how to address these difficult issues, being able to sit down with a lawyer or have a phone conversation with a lawyer for half an hour, not worry about the cost and get some guidance can be invaluable. We want to hear some of the stories that you've heard, but first, if you could maybe just talk a little bit about the legality, the constitutionality of these vaccine passports.
So the vaccine passport is a very interesting issue. Of course, it is all kind of predicated on the idea that the government can somehow entice or force you to take a vaccine. And of course, until very recently, Canadian lawyers and constitutional experts would have said that's completely unconstitutional. And I mean, it's quite interesting when you look on the government's website. There's been some scrubbing of data, it almost looks like. Like there's memos that have disappeared. There's a memo that's disappeared from the Canadian Armed Forces website. And suddenly what was clearly unconstitutional now is, well, maybe a gray area. It could happen. It's quite interesting to watch this all unfold. And then there is actually quite clear case law on informed consent and also on involuntary vaccination. Like both those things are very important to the law in this conversation, vaccine passports. And when you're under duress and you take this to keep your job, is that really informed consent? Or, you know, in the worst case scenario, what happens when you're vaccinated against your will? As has happened before, the courts have found that's battery in the past. So now that's kind of bookending some of this conversation. And with vaccine passports, I think it touches on a lot of issues. It should touch quite clearly on Section 7 of the Charter under both liberty and security of the person. But there's mobility rights that might be at stake. And the Constitution guarantees that we can work in any province, we can move between provinces. And I would like to think a court might say that means you can leave your home for work as well. It's not clear to me that that's the case, but I like to think it would be. And then, you know, there's also equality rights and freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and freedom of association. All these rights could be wound up with this vaccine passport. But also, I think what's very important is privacy rights. Privacy rights, the privacy commissioners in Canada jointly issued a statement in the spring about whether or not governments and businesses could actually ask for your private health information. And it was quite clear what they said, that without a clear legislative change of some sort, privacy legislation says no, they can't do that. And so when you're looking for whether or not a business can request this from you, you're probably looking at the health orders. And I know here in Alberta, the most recent health order, I think it was number 43-2001, actually did discuss it and said that businesses could require it of patrons. But I haven't yet seen in this province a health order that says that businesses can require it of their employees, which could be why I believe that employees are still kind of carved out from this. But, you know, that's precarious too. All it takes is a health order. That's very easy to do.
And on that note, speaking of these health orders, traditionally you talked about for a change like this to occur, there'd need to be legislative change. And when those legislative changes take place, they're checked and balanced effectively against the Constitution, against charter rights, those things. These health orders circumvent that whole thing. And what we're dealing with is, I mean, they can technically call them orders or laws, but there's a certain amount of lawlessness because this isn't legislated law.
Absolutely. You know, that's a very, very important point. And so the Constitution, which I referenced before, with mobility rights, freedom of expression, association, all those rights that were discussed. What happens with the public health order, which is not passed through the legislature, not passed through a public body, it's an amendment of the Constitution in disguise. It amends the Constitution, and that should be reprehensible to all Canadians, because this is, I always tell this story. There's a famous play called A Man for All Seasons, and it's about Sir Thomas More. And in that, he describes why it is that he, as a lawyer, thinks that the law should protect everyone, even villains, even people you don't like. And the purpose, he says, is because when you cut down all the laws in England, he would say, cut down all the laws in England to go after the devil, in this case the devil is COVID, if we cut all those laws down, what happens when the devil turns around on us? What law is going to protect us when those winds blow? And so I am very convinced and very concerned that we are currently headed into a time of lawlessness. And right now, the lawless party is the state. The government is doing what it wants, and it deeply concerns me, because as a lawyer, what I want is to be able to look at the past and take the past, assess the present, and judge what will happen in the future. That's how you advise clients. But right now, I can't rely on the past because we're in this state of upheaval. So when a client comes in and says, this is what's happening to me, I say things like, well, if it were 2018, I think the law would be very clearly in your favor. But we're not in 2018. We don't know what the future is. And so it's a very unstable time, and it's very concerning to me because as a lawyer, again, I like the rule of law. I like the predictability and knowing that there's rules there that we all play by, but I'm growing increasingly concerned we're entering a time of lawlessness.
And like you said, basically that precedent is being thrown out the window. It's kind of fly by night, take it as it comes, which is not how a legal system is meant to operate. The other thing that you mentioned there that I think a lot of people will appreciate is there's people who are willing to let all of this slide because they say it's an emergency. But the charter is here for when things get tough, for when we have questions. It's not when everything's fine. It's for these times that it's there, and it's meant to enshrine them fundamentally. I want to move beyond just the legal speak because it's not just about that. What we see, and we're being approached by moms whose kids can't play sports anymore, or people who are losing their livelihoods. The real cost of these restrictions is livelihoods and lives ultimately. So could you tell us about some of the personal stories that you've heard on some of these vaccine consultations from people and how these restrictions and mandates are affecting people's lives adversely?
So it's quite a broad category, actually. All the categories are very broad. I've been very surprised that I can't pin it down to one particular age group, not one particular gender, not one particular religious belief, not one particular race or ethnicity. It's very broad. And what's concerning to me is that it's all professions. Like I've talked with people who work in the oil and gas industry out in the field. I've talked with executives, banking industry people, people who are flying aircraft around this country, quite a few pilots, people who work in the office towers downtown for a private business, people who work as a nurse for AHS, people who are so-called the contracted healthcare providers that the AHS memo caught. It's everyone, it's very broad. And so some of the stories that really have affected me is, hearing from a mother who's currently pregnant and she's doing what she thinks is right, protect her baby. And she's being told, you're going to lose your job if you don't take this vaccination that you don't know anything about and can't know anything about because it's so new. Or when I talk to people who are in the healthcare industry and they'll tell me, well, I'm worried about if I say anything, they're going to come and discipline me, so I can't really speak freely, but I'm not taking the vaccine, and I would rather quit my job. And it's just amazing. And pilots the same thing. They're very concerned about their livelihoods, and they're being told that they have to do this sometimes without exemptions. In fact, WestJet sent out a memo about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago now, that included an FAQ section. And that FAQ section had a question that said, will I get severance? And the answer was one word long, and it said no. And in 2018, that's not true. But now, what do they know that we don't know? I feel as though what I'm doing is when I'm advising these clients with these interesting stories, that we're playing a game of chess. And I only know half the rules. And the other side is making moves, and I don't know what rule book they're following, and I can't anticipate it. So when I see, will I get severance? No. I don't really know the game board here. I don't know what the rules are. And that's very concerning to me. So my imagination starts to wander. I start to think maybe the federal government's going to bring in some sort of rule and change the law. Maybe this is going to be a national public health order. Maybe there's going to be regulations tacked on to some act. Either way, they're probably going to avoid Parliament to do so because the deadline we were given was the end of October. They're not going to go through first, second, third reading, go through the Senate, all that procedural formality to get this done. They're going to have to rush it. So there's going to be happening another way if this happens. But this is my big concern. So if young mothers who are pregnant don't have a choice, What about people who have had COVID? I mean, there seems to be some data that says that people who have prior existing natural immunity are the ones that suffer the worst adverse effects of vaccination. Well, they can go to a lab and they can prove they're immune to the very disease they're being told they need to vaccinate for, or they're going to lose their job. That is wholly irrational. It is very irrational, and I would like to think the courts would backstop those people if they ever go to court against their former employer.
Finally, any words to people out there who maybe haven't had a vaccine consultation, haven't spoken to lawyers, people who are maybe afraid, unsure, their employers aren't willing to help them? A word of maybe a minor vaccine consultation to people generally as to what they should do to ensure that their rights aren't infringed.
Well, the first thing is, if you're unionized, you go right to your union rep and you force them or grab them by the ears and say, I need representation. Don't take no for an answer. From what I've seen, union reps aren't all that excited about doing anything about this. I mean, like every other sort of quasi-political body, they're interested in upward mobility. So you have to be the most vocal advocate for what you want. That's the first thing. So if you're unionized, go through that. You have to exhaust that process. Now, if you happen to have an employer that's governed by the charter, and that's maybe universities, maybe, AHS maybe, teachers maybe. I say maybe because there is some ambiguity in the law here, and we would have to do some research on particularly the situation these people are facing. Yeah. But if you work directly for the government, like a municipal government or something like that, then perhaps the charter will apply, and that will help you. Now, the other side of it is, if you have a private employer and they're demanding that you get vaccinated, the sad news is, in this country, you can be fired at any time for any reason. None of us has a right to a particular job. And your employer, it's just a matter of, are they firing you with cause or without cause? And I like to think that no one's employment contract would say that you have to take a COVID-19 vaccine. Mm-hmm. And hopefully, all these dismissals that are coming, because there's going to be a wave of dismissals in the coming weeks, I'd like to think that it's all without cause and that people are entitled to severance. So then at that point, the problem is that us lawyers, basically what we can do to help is we can help you get a fair severance package. And maybe in some circumstances, look at getting a damage award for the dismissal as well. But honestly, the situation is grim. The law has never really developed to deal with circumstances like this. I have never heard of 30% of the workforce being fired in some industries because they won't take a vaccine. It's surprising to me, since twice before, nurses in Ontario have won arbitration panels where they have withheld and been successful in not taking a mandatory flu vaccine and not being forced to mask on the job. I mean, that's happened twice, but so it's surprising to me that we're ending up this way, that you could have, for instance, a 17-year employee from WestJet who's worked from home for 17 years, and she's going to lose her job out the door, and they had the guts to say no severance. It's unbelievable.
Well, it's certainly a grim picture for now. Fortunately, we aren't backing down from this fight. Vaccine consultations was the very start of it, but now we're moving forward with fightvaccinepassports.com. We plan to challenge the legality of these unconstitutional restrictions and vaccine passports in court, and we hope to set that valuable precedent that will hopefully liberate the country from these unjust measures. Final word to you, Derek.
Don't give up. Times are dark. You'd be surprised how many people are in the same position as you. Over the last 18, 19 months, there's been a pressure cooker, isolation and intense pressure on you. And what you're feeling now is partially artificial. You're not alone. There are many other people like you. In the end, you have to decide what your personal economy is, what you want to do, and then you're going to have to live with that, but you're not alone.
Derek had some serious concerns over how grim the situation has become. But fear not, we plan to fight this, and we will fight it till the very end, but we need your help. If you're willing to contribute to help fight for people's fundamental rights, go to fightvaccinepassports.com.